SeaWorld is keeping a close eye on a killer whale blamed for killing a trainer.
The crowd came for a show but left in stunned silence. At Loro Parque, Kato, the star orca, did the unthinkable. He attacked his trainer in a split-second burst of violence. No warning, no escape. And this wasn't the first time.
It is nearly impossible to forget the horrific attack earlier this year at SeaWorld. The attack that left a trainer dead, drowned by a killer whale.
Across the globe, captive orcas have turned on their trainers in shocking, unpredictable ways. What sparks these sudden, deadly outbursts? What really happened in those final, heart-pounding moments? Dive into the haunting stories of 7 orca trainers who never saw it coming. Number 7. Alexis Martinez and Kato. For most of his life, Kato had never felt the ocean. He had never chased live prey or traveled across open waters with his pod. Instead, he was raised in captivity and trained to perform in shows. At Loro Parque in Tenerife, Kato became a star attraction, drawing crowds of tourists eager to see a killer whale up close. He had even been transferred across facilities for different performances. But by 2009, something in him began to change. That year, during preparations for the park's Christmas show, Kato was in a training pool with 29-year-old Alexis Martinez. Alexis was a seasoned trainer who had spent years working with orcas. The two were familiar with each other, and their routines had always run smoothly. But on December 24th, things took a turn for the worse. At first, Kato seemed off. He missed a few of his usual moves during training, but he floated near the surface, quiet and still. Alexis stayed with him, likely sensing something was wrong but unsure how serious it would become. One of the staff members later said he noticed something unusual. Kato appeared to deliberately place himself between Alexis and the stage platform, almost as if he didn't want him to leave. When the underwater stage signal was given and Alexis started to swim away, Kato moved in. Slowly at first, but with growing pressure. Another trainer, watching from the side, tried using control signals that had always worked in the past, but Kato didn't respond. He used the tip of his snout, known as the rostrum, to forcefully push Alexis to the bottom of the pool. The situation quickly became serious. The trainer on land switched to backup signals, hoping to regain control. For a moment, it looked like Kato was calming down. He rose to the surface and took a breath, but within seconds, he dove again, this time returning with Alexis balanced on his rostrum. His mouth was closed. Then, Kato let go, and Alexis slowly sank. Panic set in. Trainers scrambled to isolate Kato. He resisted, stalling near the gate as if he was toying with it. Only after a safety net was released into the water did he move into the adjacent pool. That gave the team just enough time to recover Alexis's body from the bottom. The injuries Alexis suffered were catastrophic. Internal bleeding, multiple organ tears, compression fractures, and bite marks covered his body. There was nothing that could be done to save him. His post-mortem confirmed that he died as a result of an orca attack. What made it worse was knowing this didn't come out of nowhere. Experts had already expressed concern about the orcas at Loro Parque. The tanks created an environment that left the whales bored, frustrated, and emotionally strained. Without a strong female to guide the social structure, things among the whales became unpredictable. Kato and the others were constantly adjusting to one another, struggling to establish dominance and routine. Boredom inside the tanks became so extreme that the orcas often tore strips off the Metflex lining used for waterproofing, just to keep themselves occupied. When animals built for speed, social bonds, and miles of ocean are kept in tight, shallow tanks, their natural instincts get distorted. The pressure builds, and eventually, something cracks. The tragedy with Kato and Alexis left behind more than grief. It exposed the strain that comes from forcing powerful marine animals into confined spaces for entertainment. These creatures are intelligent, emotional, and socially complex. When we strip them of the freedom to live as they were meant to, something breaks. And sometimes that break turns deadly. Number 6. Kasatka and Ken Peters. One of the most disturbing cases of orca aggression involved a female orca named Kasatka. The incident happened at SeaWorld San Diego on November 29, 2006. What took place during that evening show left many stunned. Trainer Ken Peters was performing a routine trick called the rocket hop, where the whale propels the trainer out of the water. But instead of completing the trick, Kasatka suddenly turned and grabbed Peters by the foot, dragging him underwater. What followed was 9 minutes of sheer terror. Kasatka pulled Peters deep below the surface, holding him down. Every now and then, she brought him up just long enough for him to gasp for air before pulling him under again. This wasn't happening behind the scenes. The crowd watched in shock, and it was all caught on camera. Eventually, Peters found a brief window of escape when Kasatka loosened her grip. Other trainers quickly reacted, stretching a net between them. That barrier helped him swim away. Kasatka still tried to follow, but Peters reached safety. He survived with a broken foot and multiple puncture wounds. It could have been far worse. What made the situation even more alarming was that this was not the first time something like this had happened. Kasatka had attacked trainers before. In fact, she had targeted Peters back in 1999. So this second incident raised serious concerns, especially since both encounters involved the same whale and the same trainer. Peters later said he didn't believe Kasatka meant to kill him. He even compared the risk to getting in a car every day, knowing accidents can happen. He explained that even while being dragged underwater, he felt like she would eventually let him go. That view, however, was not shared by everyone. Many people believed that what happened was not random. If you take a massive predator from the ocean, lock it in a tank, isolate it from its natural habitat, and force it to perform tricks for years, it might snap eventually. That is exactly what some say happened between Kasatka and Peters. Experts who reviewed the footage and analyzed the situation added another layer to the explanation. Kasatka's calf had been vocalizing from another pool during the performance. These vocal calls may have stressed her out or triggered a protective response, and this could explain her sudden aggression during the trick. Kasatka's life came to an end in 2017. She was euthanized after developing an untreatable form of pneumonia. By that time, she was around 40 to 42 years old, a long life by captive orca standards, but one marked by isolation, stress, and ultimately tragedy. This event pushed many to ask deeper questions. How much can an animal endure before it breaks? Kasatka's behavior didn't come out of nowhere. It came from years of being kept in an environment that didn't meet her natural needs. No ocean, no real family group, and nowhere to escape when stress built up. Number 5. Claudia Volhart and Tekoa. In 2007, a 29-year-old trainer named Claudia Volhart came dangerously close to death during a routine training session with a killer whale named Tekoa. But before we get into what happened that day, we need to look back at Tekoa's life and what he had endured. Tekoa was born on November 8, 2000. At first, things appeared fine, but as the months passed, something began to change. His mother, Taima, started acting aggressively toward him. She raked him with her teeth, pinned him against the pool walls, and even beached him. By the following year, the situation had become too dangerous, and Tekoa was permanently separated from Taima. Another whale, Kalina, who had just given birth to a male named Tuar, took Tekoa in as a surrogate. As Tekoa grew up at SeaWorld in Orlando, he spent a lot of time with Tuar and Kalina. They were his small social group. Sometimes he also interacted with Katina and her son Ikaika, but it was Tuar he was closest to. The two young males often performed together in shows. Then on April 25, 2004, Tekoa and Tuar were loaded into a transport vehicle and flown to SeaWorld San Antonio. 2 years later, Tekoa's life changed again. He was shipped to Loro Parque in Spain, along with 3 other whales as part of a breeding loan. But this new setting was nothing like his previous homes. All 4 whales had been taken from their mothers at an early age. This disrupted their ability to form proper social bonds. When they were thrown together, the group dynamic was rocky. They fought often. Aggression became the norm. In this unstable pod, Tekoa found himself at the very bottom of the social ladder. He became the target. The others bit him, raked him, and harassed him constantly. Park staff began to worry about his condition, so they tried to send him back to SeaWorld. But SeaWorld refused. Every request to return Tekoa was turned down. Even as the group settled a little over time, the violence didn't fully stop. Tekoa's body told the story. He was covered in scars from repeated attacks. Many of the rake marks were so bad that Tekoa began beaching himself, likely trying to avoid the others. Some regular visitors at the park said they could recognize him just by looking at the deep scars along his side. All this may have played a role in what happened next. Claudia Volhart had joined Loro Parque in 2003. By 2007, she had been working with Tekoa for about a year before the attack. It occurred during one of the pre-show rehearsals. Claudia and Tekoa were performing a behavior called the foot push. In this move, the trainer places their feet on the orca's rostrum and the whale pushes them across the surface of the pool. But that day, something changed. Mid-performance, Tekoa suddenly yanked Claudia underwater. He pulled her to the bottom, then brought her back to the surface. Over and over, he repeated this terrifying act. Her colleagues rushed to help and were finally able to get her out of the water. Claudia suffered serious injuries. Her forearm was broken in 2 places. She also had damage to one of her lungs. She was rushed to the hospital and stabilized. Surprisingly, she chose to return to work after recovering. But after that incident, strict new rules were introduced. Tekoa was no longer allowed to interact with any non-senior trainer. All water work involving him was shut down completely. It is easy to look at the bite or the attack and call the whale dangerous. But there is always more beneath the surface. Tekoa had been passed around from park to park, removed from his family, placed into groups with other isolated whales, and subjected to daily stress and violence. His environment was not natural. It was controlled, restricted, and often brutal. When we look at Tekoa's journey, the scars on his body, and the choices made by humans around him, it becomes clear. This is not just about a whale snapping. It's about what happens when wild creatures are kept in spaces they were never meant to live in. Number 4. Annette Eckes and Shamu. Not every stunt goes according to plan, especially when the star performer weighs several tons and has rows of teeth designed for hunting. On April 20th, 1971, SeaWorld's public relations secretary Annette Eckes was asked to take part in a publicity stunt. The plan was simple. She would ride a killer whale named Shamu across the water while wearing a bikini. Cameras were rolling, the crowd was watching, and everything appeared to go as expected at first. For a few moments, Eckes balanced on the orca's back without issue. But just as the ride was coming to an end, something shifted. Without warning, Shamu tossed her off. Before anyone could react, the whale had clamped down on Eckes' leg and refused to let go. The peaceful atmosphere vanished. Screams filled the air as Shamu dragged her around the tank, locked tightly in his grip. Divers jumped in, armed with metal poles, trying to force the whale to release her. But there was hesitation. One wrong move, one tug too hard, and they feared the orca's powerful teeth could rip her flesh apart. It took a lot of effort, but eventually, they pried open Shamu's jaws. Eckes was rushed out of the water and immediately collapsed from shock. Bloodied, injured, and traumatized, she was quickly taken to the hospital. Her wounds were deep and severe. It required 25 stitches. She later sued SeaWorld for the incident, hoping to hold them accountable. But although a court initially ruled in her favor, the monetary compensation she received was overturned on appeal. This attack added to the growing concern over keeping massive wild animals in enclosed tanks. When an animal built for the ocean is forced to live in a limited space and interact with people for entertainment, the results can be unpredictable and sometimes violent. Number 3. Shuka attacks trainer. In 2012, a packed audience at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom witnessed something they didn't expect. A 19-year-old captive-born orca named Shuka, performing during a show, suddenly turned aggressive. At first, everything appeared routine. But then, without warning, Shuka lunged